Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be Part 39, Chapter 24, entitled Carry You. The sun beamed down on the city as the three of them walked down the sidewalk. The first time he had ever done this with Tokiyami and Hawks, Shoto had been unnerved by the amount of people that had approached them to get autographs. Not only from Hawks, but also from him and Tokiyami. He had gone on patrols with his father before, and he had always stood in his shadow as the man ignored people's attempts to get his autograph or ask him questions. Endeavor was not the #1 hero for his personality, that was for sure. Now, though, Shoto was unnerved for a completely different reason. No one was approaching them. The people of Fukuoka were all looking at their phones, standing on sidewalks or waiting on buses as they scrolled or watched, brows furrowed and eyes full of concern, or fear in some cases. There was an ominous feeling in the air. Hawks felt it too. Shoto could see some primary feathers zipping around to investigate the area, checking for anything wrong. There was a strange heaviness to the air that Shoto had only ever felt once. He'd felt it when he had tried to rescue Izuku from Kamino, and his quirk had gone haywire. But Izuku was supposed to be at his own work studies with Sir Night-Eye. Shoto had a bad feeling about it all, and they passed in front of a store selling 2 large televisions, a display of them at the front window. Several people were standing in front of them, watching, each of them with different expressions on their faces. The Hawks group passed in front of the screens, and Shoto stiffened. "What is this mad banquet of darkness?" Tokiyami frowned, leaning forward to peer at the screens. The screen showed a view from far away of the supposed target. The camera was lying on its side, and from behind it there was the sound of someone crying and gibbering as if in utter terror. The camera was pointed at a figure hovering over the ground. Familiar curly green hair floating upward. The sky was dark, and the clouds churned violently as bright green lightning struck the ground all over, even arcing from the person Shoto easily recognized as Izuku. Shoto's hands clenched at his sides, heart picking up speed as his stomach plummeted. Black tendrils were shooting from Izuku's body to grab onto some creature that was trying to hurt him. Cracks had formed in the ground, and what looked like skinless monsters in the shapes of people were attacking the creature, apparently driven by Izuku's will. Shoto couldn't see him very well with the bad angle in the far-off camera, but he could see that Izuku's eyes were glowing, and they were bright red, and the familiar, smaller arcs of green lightning seemed to be shooting out of them to crack in the air. And Shoto had no idea what the black tendrils were, or how Izuku was floating. As far as he knew, Izuku's quirk allowed for nothing like that. How much did he not know about his closest friend? How long had he kept that from him? Shoto was so worried, so lost. He was unused to having so many warring emotions tearing through him, and he didn't like it. Then the white-haired child showed up and things happened, and Shoto's hands were grasping at his costume, eyes wide as he watched the worst happen. Izuku took the massive figure of the monstrous villain into his mindscape, and a whine escaped from the back of Shoto's throat, hands clenching hard enough for his short nails to dig into his palms painfully. Izuku glanced around, but Shoto couldn't see exactly what he was looking at from the awkward sideways angle of the camera. Izuku took one step forward, and then collapsed onto the ground, his body giving out like a puppet with its strings cut. Shoto turned, ignoring Tokiyami shouting at him as he broke into a full-out sprint toward the train station. A hand wrapped around his waist, and he hissed, struggling. "Stop moving." Hawks's voice was strained by his ear as they lifted off the ground. "Flying is faster. Just don't move." Shoto glanced upward, catching sight of Tokiyami on the hero's back, between Hawks's crimson wings. Shoto looked back down, uncaring about the great height that they were reaching. He would get to Izuku no matter what. His arms ached with the remnants of the feeling of hugging him early that morning, only a few hours ago. As soon as Izuku hit the ground, it was like Shota could breathe again. He'd never felt such stark, raw terror in his entire life. It was primitive. It was like the core of the earth itself had released all the rage and power that it had stored from the beginning of time. It was unfathomable. It was horrible. The moment that Izuku fell, the monsters he'd somehow created dissolved into chunky puddles of red sludge. The storm clouds began slowly blowing away, and the lightning halted, the rain stopping to leave behind the smell of ozone, sweet and pungent, like an electrical spark. The shadows retreated from whence they'd come, and the world steadily returned to normal, leaving behind destroyed buildings, cracked, broken pavement, and other crumpled debris. Shota pulled himself out of Froppy's hold, and she fell back, still absolutely frozen in place from what had gone on. Nearly everyone was recovering from the feeling of being paralyzed, and Shota tried not to notice the fronts of more than one hero's costumes darkened with piss. He climbed to his feet, barely even feeling the wound in his shoulder or the pain in his head from where it had slammed against the concrete wall when he'd hit it. He had one goal in mind, and that was to get to his kid as soon as possible. The first step was the hardest, but after that Shota was running forward, leaping over cracked chasms in the ground and dodging the puddles of dissolved monsters, his gaze forward, on the fallen form of his child. Izuku was so still, the girl nearby, afraid to touch him. She was crying heavily, hyperventilating, and her horn was glowing, sparks of light showering the ground around her. Shota met her eyes and activated his quirk. As soon as it halted her own, she dropped to the ground unconscious, overly stressed from everything that had happened. Shota continued running until he reached Izuku, his knees hitting the ground hard enough to tear the skin beneath his jumpsuit. He hesitantly reached out with his good arm, gently taking Izuku's shoulder, and pulling him over so that he was laying on his back. Shota gasped at the sight, eyes going wider than ever. Izuku, his adopted child, had skin the color of old snow, half-lidded eyes that glowed with a toxic intensity, green lightning flickering through the sclera. His fingers twitched, and his head moved with small, spastic jerks. His chest barely rose with breath, uneven and rapid. Blood dripped from the corners of his eyes and out of his ears in light trickles. Shota did not know what to do. He didn't know how to help, and his hand hovered uselessly over Izuku's body, all the while panic and adrenaline flooded his body. "Izuku," he murmured. "Can you hear me?" As if in answer, Izuku's eyes flashed the rest of the way open, the entirety of them filling with red as Shota's heart skipped. His head slammed back into the ground, and his back arched. Blood foamed at his mouth, and his hands scrabbled uselessly at the ground, his fingernails tearing. Shota gritted his teeth, pulling the small boy across his legs as he dropped backward. He was afraid to use his quirk on him, afraid of what it would do to his mind. Izuku seized against Shota while he murmured to him, tears pricking at his eyelids. Was he watching his kid die? What should he do? What could he do to help? His heart ached. The boy suddenly went absolutely still, his head dropping to the side as blood dripped onto the ground from his face. The contrast between 1 second and the next was startling. Shota's heart stuttered, and he grabbed the back of Izuku's head, barely noticing when the movement strained his own injury, tilting his head to face him. Izuku's eyes were still red, still bleeding, but they moved, seeming to shift over to see Shota. His jaw moved, and he gurgled, blood bubbling from between his lips. Panic flooded Shota's veins like acid, and he adjusted the kid so that he wasn't drowning in his own blood. "Kid, please don't do this to me," Shota whispered, cradling him. "I can't do this again." Shota lifted one of the kid's hands, laying 2 fingers over his wrist to feel his pulse, his breath hitching when he felt how weak it was. "Problem child," he murmured roughly, voice hoarse. Izuku suddenly choked, his entire body tensing, and then a brilliant, bright light poured from him, as if radiating straight out of his pores and eyes. Shota curled around him protectively, no fucking idea what was going on, except that his kid was hurting. A high-pitched keen trailing from his throat like a desperate cry for help. Shota didn't know what to do. Absolute pitch black. Izuku was curled in a ball, his arms wrapped around his knees and his face pressed into them as he floated, disjointed from anything. He could hear his rapid heartbeat, pulsing weakly through the dark cavern of his broken mind. After the bomb had gone off, Izuku had felt all of it as every bit of his mind was destroyed. Everything in it, small or large, was absolutely decimated. Being so close to the blast, Izuku had seen Overhaul be absolutely obliterated, leaving nothing behind. He'd been annihilated completely and utterly. Killed by Izuku's mind. And Izuku couldn't find it in himself to care, and maybe that should bother him, but it didn't. And it didn't matter if it did anyway. Izuku was dying. He could feel it. He could feel his body giving out, his pulse slowing, his muscles contracting and tensing with death throes. He was never going to hug his family again. Never cradle Wink in his arms or have long nights doing nothing but talking to Shoto in his room. He would never get to hear Mike sing, and he'd never get to talk to his mom again. He'd never get to grow up and prove that he was worthy of One for All. He'd never get to feel Yagi's arms around him again, or lay in the grass to watch the stars, Shoto's hand in his. Izuku used to want to die, but now he wanted to live. He wanted to live. Izuku didn't want to die. "Hey, kid," a gentle voice said, and Izuku lifted his head, eyes tired and red from crying. They were all there, all of the previous holders, but one unfamiliar man stood closer to him than the rest. The man had short, wavy white hair, and 2 large scars that crossed from over his left eye and went all the way down to his lips. He looked serious, one hand stretched out to Izuku. Izuku took the hand, allowing it to pull him up. His feet weren't touching anything, but he was still somehow standing, or floating, or something. "You're not ready for this," the man said, a strange look in his eyes. "But you're not ready for that either." He sighed, looking at the ground, his lips pressed into a thin line. Izuku looked behind him, meeting Nana's eyes. The woman offered Izuku a reassuring smile, and he frowned, pained. They all looked resigned. "You have access to my quirk now, kid," the man suddenly said, and Izuku looked back toward him in surprise. "But please, promise me, on whatever you hold most dear, that you will only use it if you absolutely have to." I don't," Izuku started, then flinched when the man's face hardened, and he interrupted him. "Promise me," he growled, his hand lifting to squeeze Izuku's shoulder roughly. I promise. On Shoto and Wink, I promise I won't use it unless I have to." Izuku stuttered, eyes wide. He didn't even know what it was. The man seemed to relax slightly, his hand dropping. "It's a self-healing quirk," he sighed, then shook his head. "But it comes at a cost. Every time you use it, it takes time off the end of your life." The man paused, staring into Izuku's eyes, making sure he understood what that meant. Izuku had the feeling that this man had found the drawback of his own quirk the hard way. "The worse the injury, the more time it'll take off. And kid, you're really injured." The man frowned as Izuku gasped, eyes widening. Did he mean... "How much time?" he whispered, arms crossing over his chest, and shivering as a cold chill washed through his mind. "It's not clear, usually, but my guess would be at least a couple years with the degree of injury. Small cuts would only be a minute or two. Missing limbs would be months, and coming back from a fatal injury like you have now, well, it's most likely more time than you realize." The man's voice was kind, but deep and foreboding. Izuku nodded in solemn understanding. "Okay," he whispered. What was a few years? It was worth it to protect Eri and to kill Overhaul. He hadn't expected to live this long anyway. "No." The man was suddenly angry, and Izuku stepped back, afraid. "You cannot think like that. People love you, Izuku. There are so many people that care about you. Your life is not dispensable. You are important to everyone that knows you, and you mustn't think differently, especially with having my quirk." The man looked behind him for a second, and Izuku wondered who he was looking at. "Kid, enjoy your life." He looked back at Izuku, eyes dark. "Don't make the same mistake as me. Spend time with your family and your friends. There is grace in saving people, but you have a life too, and it is important to relish every second of it." He laid a hand on Izuku's chest, over where his heart would be in his physical body, as the pulse echoing around them slowed even further. "Remember what you promised me, Izuku." Izuku nodded, hands clenching. "I will." A burst of light speared the room, coming from his chest where the man's hand was, and it hurt. It hurt like nothing Izuku had ever experienced before, like pure lava burning through his veins, like every nerve ending was being fried with electricity. Izuku screamed. The cleanup took time, but fortunately there had been no civilian casualties. Roads were repaired and structures were rebuilt. Soon enough, there was no more evidence of what had happened. Only a scorch mark here and there remained, marking the pavement where lightning had struck repeatedly. People talked about it for many years to come, but it was never more popular than for the first month afterward while Izuku was in the hospital. The bad camera video that Shoto had seen had millions of views despite the Hero Commission trying to remove it from online, and it had so many comments speculating about what had actually happened. People wanted to know what had gone down, what the monsters had been, what exactly Nova's quirk was. But there was one thing the entire world did know. They all knew who Nova was, the hero that protected the little girl's life almost at the cost of his own. The hero that protected. They knew his name. Shoto had arrived quickly that day with Tokiyami and Hawks. He'd run to the desk and demanded to see Izuku. They'd denied him, but with some smooth talking by the number 2 hero, they were able to get Shoto into Izuku's room. He burst inside, panicked, to see Izuku laying on a bed, eyes closed. Shoto rushed inside, hands hitting the side of the bed as he scanned Izuku, searching for any injury, any wound. There was nothing. Izuku looked fine. if not a bit paler than usual. His hair was down and pulled around his head. There was an IV in his arm to give him fluids, and his chest moved on its own, breathing evenly. But otherwise, he was completely still. "Young Todoroki," a voice said, and Shoto looked over, blinking, when he found All Might sitting next to Izuku's bed. Or maybe it was Yagi in this form. Shoto didn't even know. "How is he?" Shoto asked, eyes moving back to Izuku's sleeping form. "He's fine," All Might shrugged sadly. "Physically, he's fine. They're going to do some brain imaging to see what's going on, but his outsides are fine." His outsides? Shoto blinked weakly. "I saw him go down. I saw blood. He was—" "We don't know, young Todoroki." All Might sounded pained. "We don't know." Shoto swallowed heavily, reaching for Izuku's hand, noting the fact that one finger on each hand had been wrapped in medical tape to prevent his quirk from activating. He dropped into the nearest seat without releasing Izuku's hand. He leaned forward to set his forehead against the side of the bed. After a moment of confused thought that made him angrier and angrier, his head shot up, burning eyes directed at All Might. "You know more than you've said," he growled, thumb ghosting across Izuku's knuckles. "You know. What was that? What he did? What—" Shoto shook his head, irritated with himself for being unable to form his thoughts into clear sentences. He'd never had that issue before, but recently, when it came to Izuku, nothing made sense. His feelings were all disorderly, and his train of thought had no rails. All Might offered Shoto a crooked smile. "They're not my secrets to tell," he answered, lifting a hand sadly, his smile dropping. He sighed heavily, shoulders lifting with the movement. Shoto frowned but didn't press the issue, laying his head back down, by Izuku's hip. He was so exhausted. He was so done with seeing Izuku in a hospital bed. Days passed and brain scans came back mostly normal, for his state anyway. They did several tests on him, trying to figure out why he wouldn't wake up. MRIs, a spinal tap, EEG, and more. Izuku was deeply unconscious, but his pupils did react to light, and all other tests indicated that his brain was intact and okay. The general idea, after a week, seemed to be exhaustion of some sort, though the doctors really had no idea. It didn't make sense. Izuku didn't leave the intensive care unit for the entire time that he was in the coma, which meant Shoto couldn't visit as much as he'd liked. He was forced to attend school like normal, but the entire dynamic of the class was skewed without Izuku being there. The school festival planning began and Class 1A barely took part, deciding eventually on just a study session. No one felt like putting energy into it. Ida only argued for something other than a study session for a minute before giving up and relenting. It wouldn't be the same without Izuku. They all agreed. Two wannabe villains ended up trying to make a spectacle of the entire thing anyway, but were easily caught by Ectoplasm and Hound Dog. The festival was called off because of it, though, and everyone went back to the dorms. The civilians that had come to see it, heading home too. Shoto instead went with Uraraka and Shinso to talk to Izuku about it. Wink traveled to the dorms on her own, usually staying with Shoto or Aizawa and Mike during most nights. Though many students often caught her walking the hallways, crying. She would stop in front of Izuku's closed door and raise her head, yelling loudly, begging for Izuku to let her in, to come back to her. When that happened, Koda would have to rescue her, tears in his own eyes as he lifted her to cradle her to his chest, whispering soft words to her while she buried her face in his arm. She didn't play with Koda's rabbit anymore, like she had done before Izuku's coma. She wouldn't even eat most of the time. It was awful to see. Aizawa or Mike or both were almost always with Izuku when Shoto visited the hospital room. They were all waiting for him to wake up. The entire class was suffering. Aizawa started looking even more haggard. His usual beard shadow was becoming more and more scraggly. Mike wasn't as loud, and All Might was rarely ever in his muscle form anymore. The class barely spoke. Kirishima, Kaminari, and Ashido doing their best to organize outings, but no one had the will to do anything when Izuku couldn't join them. Eri was there too sometimes, and Shoto caught Aizawa rocking her in his arms several times, whispering reassuring words to her and running a hand through her hair. It was sweet, and Shoto wondered if that's what dads were like. If that was the difference between a dad and a father. Shoto's relationship with his father had started changing. Shoto would never forgive him for his hell of a childhood or what he had done to his mother and to Toya. He told the man straight to his face when he came to Shoto's room one night, when he'd been visiting, trying to apologize. "It's nice that you recognize the shit you've done," Shoto had told him. "But an apology is not enough. Will never be enough. Endeavor, you are not my family. I'm going to make my own, and you will have nothing to do with it. Leave." And Endeavor had left, and they hadn't spoken since. Shoto had almost felt guilty about what he'd said, but then his memory had reminded him of his mother, of his fractured childhood, and he didn't feel guilty anymore. He had better things to worry about anyway. Izuku started waking up on the 23rd day of being unconscious. Hisashi was the only one there at the time, singing softly to the boy while he went over playlists for his radio station. He caught a small movement out of the corner of his eye and looked over in confusion, phone tumbling from his hand when he saw Izuku's eyes open. Hisashi leapt out of his seat, breath picking up in excitement as he leaned over Izuku, stray hairs falling over his face. "Izuku? Izuku?" he asked, smoothing a hand across Izuku's head. Emerald eyes slid to his, slowly, full of effort. Hisashi wanted to scream and jump up and down. He wanted to punch a wall or throw something. He was so excited. "Izuku?" Hisashi voiced again, his hand still stroking Izuku's hair. "We've missed you, little listener." Izuku didn't respond, except for his eyes to slide closed, a soft sigh escaping his lungs. Hisashi was devastated at first, but later on he was told that it was a very good sign, and he allowed himself to be positive about what he'd seen. The next day it was Shota that was there when he woke up again, his fingers twitching and his breathing changing. Shota looked over with interest from where he'd been grading papers. Hisashi had told him the night before about Izuku waking up, but he hadn't expected to see it himself. As soon as Shota saw those bright green eyes, no strange lightning flickering through them, no blood, no red, his eyes filled with tears. He scrubbed his face violently with one hand, standing up to take Izuku's hand with his other, squeezing. "Izuku," he murmured, voice thick with unshed tears. Izuku looked at him, eyes full of concern and curiosity, but no fear. The hand Shota held lightly squeezed back, and Shota almost sobbed in relief. The corner of Izuku's mouth twitched, as if he was trying to speak or smile, and Shota leaned forward. But Izuku did neither of those things, his eyes sliding closed once again. Shota sighed and dropped back into his seat. They had explained that Izuku would probably only wake up for a little bit of time at first, but that it was a good sign toward the fact that he would be waking up. In all honesty, Shota hadn't been sure that Izuku would be waking up at all. Hisashi had been the confident one, reassuring Shota in the middle of the night when he couldn't stop thinking about it, or when his nightmares woke him up. Hisashi was always so positive, so optimistic. But he hadn't seen what Shota had. He hadn't had to hold Izuku as he seized, blood pouring from his face, keening in pain. He hadn't been there. Shota had seen it all, felt it all. He didn't know how Izuku could have survived it. And where was Overhaul? That had been difficult to explain in the paperwork, which there had been an obscene amount of, as always. Their worry, though, was that Izuku was in the coma because he was trying to keep Overhaul in his mindscape. They would need answers when Izuku woke up completely. It took several more days for that to happen, and it was just Shota there when he woke. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 24 of State of Mind. The second half to this chapter will be up next, which will continue where this one left off. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and reactions to this one. Definitely a more somber chapter, as we see a lot of the point of views coming from, like, Shoto and Shota as well, right? The class's response to what's happening to Izuku, the amount of time he spent in a coma, as well as this new quirk, right? And the importance of Izuku holding on to his value so that he doesn't utilize it in a way that cuts off his own life. So a lot of interesting themes taking place here. I was contemplating cutting it a little bit sooner, but I thought this was a good place to end it for the first half of this chapter because in this section, we at least know that Izuku's waking up. There's a little bit of closure there, a little bit of understanding that Izuku is waking up. He's not going to stay in this coma permanently, right? So there's a little bit of hope at the end of this part of the chapter. So that's why I ended it where I did. But I'd love to hear any reactions that you had in the comments below. And just a reminder, as always, that this fic is located over on AO3. So if you have a chance to slide over, leaving comments, kudos, and support to the original author, I'm sure it's much appreciated. As always, thank you all so much for listening.